"Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you and your family to relocate immediately," the flight attendant said, her voice calm but cold. Elijah Carter looked up, confused. His wife had been reading quietly. His son had headphones in. No one was being loud. "It's the smell," she continued. "Your food is disturbing other passengers." But they hadn't eaten, not a crumb. Phones emerged. A girl whispered, "I think this is racial." Elijah didn't raise his voice. He just blinked slowly and reached for the one thing that could flip the entire flight upside down. The air inside the cabin was warm, pressurized, yet suddenly suffocating. Row 14 sat frozen. Elijah Carter blinked twice, lifting his eyes from the in-flight magazine, as if he'd misheard the woman standing in the aisle. His wife Danielle paused mid-scroll on her tablet, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Beside them, Ethan, 17, slowly pulled one earbud out, sensing the tension ripple around his family like a tightening net. The flight attendant's name tag read Heather G. Her expression was carefully controlled, but the disdain was clear beneath the surface, like a painted smile that couldn't quite hide the snarl beneath. "Again, sir," she said louder, glancing at the surrounding passengers. "We've received several concerns. Some passengers have expressed discomfort about certain cultural smells and sounds. We'd like to reseat your family at the rear of the aircraft to avoid further disturbance." The hum of overhead vents filled the awkward silence that followed. Danielle's voice was smooth as glass. "I'm sorry. Could you clarify what exactly the complaints are? We haven't opened any food. We've barely spoken since boarding." Heather crossed her arms. "Ma'am, I'm not going to debate this. Passenger comfort is our top priority." Elijah looked around. No one nearby looked uncomfortable, just curious, eyes flickering like spectators at a car crash. Some had phones in hand already, pretending to scroll but clearly recording. Ethan felt his chest tighten. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to a black family, but he'd hoped it would never happen to them. His hand instinctively moved toward his phone camera. Elijah's eyes caught his movement, and with the softest shake of the head, told him, "Not yet." "But we haven't broken any rules," Danielle replied, measured. "My son was listening to music. I was reading. My husband hasn't even spoken since the plane left the gate." Heather's lips pressed into a thin line. "Please cooperate, or I'll need to involve the captain." 3 rows up, in 11C, a young woman whispered into her phone, "Y'all, this is happening live. Southwest Flight 3298. They're trying to kick off a whole black family over nothing, like for real." She hit record. Her TikTok handle, @Chloe on the Move, already had a few hundred followers. But within minutes, that number would surge. Elijah leaned forward, speaking for the first time. "Ma'am, may I ask who made the complaints?" "I'm not at liberty to share that," Heather snapped. "Then may I ask under which FAA regulation are you requesting we move seats?" Danielle added, tapping her tablet. "Because unless there's a safety reason, passenger relocation can't be enforced without consent." Heather's cheeks flushed. She hadn't expected a challenge, especially not a legal one. "Please understand," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "We're trying to avoid a scene." Danielle's smile was thin. "A bit late for that, don't you think?" At that moment, a tall man in a baseball cap stood up from seat 15A. He turned toward the aisle, raising his phone as if adjusting the volume, but he too was recording. He didn't say a word, just stared. A woman across the aisle from the Carters, middle-aged, wearing a navy cardigan, glanced at them and then at Heather. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "I've been sitting here since boarding. They've been quiet and respectful. I haven't noticed anything unusual." Heather ignored her. Ethan clenched his jaw. This wasn't about volume, or food, or comfort. It was something deeper, something every black kid in America learns to recognize early. The mask of politeness stretched over quiet contempt. "Elijah," Danielle said quietly, "this is escalating." He nodded once. "I know. Another passenger, someone near the back, called out, "They didn't even eat anything. I've been watching." Heather spun around. "Sir, please remain seated." Too late. The spark had caught. Passengers were watching more actively now. Some leaned forward. Others whispered. Chloe's TikTok stream climbed to 800 viewers in under 5 minutes. Ethan's phone vibrated. A message from his friend Josh. "Bro, you're trending. Someone's live streaming what's happening on your flight." His stomach flipped. So much for staying under the radar. Heather pressed a button on her in-flight tablet. Moments later, the captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "This is your captain speaking. We are currently managing a minor passenger situation. Please remain seated and refrain from recording. We'll be underway shortly." The cabin didn't move. Heather looked back at the Carters. "This is your final warning. Relocate now, or you'll be removed upon landing." Danielle stared at her. "Removed? For what infraction?" Heather faltered. "Disruptive behavior." Ethan's voice cut through. "Ma'am, that's false. And recorded." Elijah exhaled slowly. The walls were closing in, but not on them. He reached down to his leather carry-on, slowly unzipped it. The corner of a document peeked out, an embossed seal glinting under the overhead lights. Danielle saw it and gently placed a hand on his arm. "Not yet." "I'd like to speak to the captain directly," Elijah said calmly. Heather hesitated. "He's busy. He's about to be a lot busier," Danielle muttered. In the front row, Chloe whispered into her stream, "I don't know who they are, but the way they're handling this? Something tells me this ain't gonna end the way she thinks it will." From the back of the plane, a soft cheer rose. Not loud, not organized, but a smattering of quiet support. It grew as passengers began voicing what they'd seen. "They didn't do anything. This is so wrong. I'm glad someone's recording." Heather's face had turned pale. A ding came from the cockpit, then a second. The captain's door opened, and that's when everything started to change. Captain James Nolan stood at the front of the cabin, his crisp uniform somehow amplifying the silence. He scanned the scene, assessing the faces staring back, some irritated, others concerned, but most expectant. The air was thick with something unspoken, the kind of collective anticipation people feel right before a storm hits. Heather straightened, smoothing her skirt, trying to reclaim the authority that had started slipping from her grasp. "Captain, the family in row 14 has refused a crew instruction and is being disruptive to other passengers." Nolan turned his eyes to Elijah, who sat calmly, hands folded over his lap. Beside him, Danielle maintained her professional poise, while Ethan looked from one adult to the next, jaw tight but restrained. "Is that accurate?" Nolan asked, directing his question to Elijah. "No, sir," Elijah said evenly. "There's been no disruption. We've been seated quietly since boarding. We've neither eaten nor spoken loudly. My wife requested clarification on the alleged complaints. That's all," Danielle added. "And we asked for the specific FAA regulation that would permit forced relocation in this circumstance." Nolan gave Heather a sideways glance. "Do you have documentation of the complaints?" Heather hesitated. They were verbal complaints. Multiple passengers expressed discomfort. "Names?" Nolan's tone was gentle but firm. "I didn't get their seat numbers. It was just mentioned in passing," she replied, her voice thinning. Danielle pulled up the FAA site on her tablet. According to federal aviation regulations, Part 91.1 Weapon, a passenger may not interfere with a crew member's duties, but simply questioning an order, especially one not related to safety, is not interference, and recording is permitted during level flight unless specifically instructed otherwise for safety. A soft murmur moved through the cabin. A few heads nodded. Phones, still recording silently, now zoomed in on the conversation. Behind the Carters, a man wearing thick glasses and a gray beanie sat perfectly still. His tray table was down, his phone face down beside a plastic cup of water. He tapped his ring finger lightly against the table, almost in rhythm. Ethan had noticed him earlier, but now the man leaned slightly toward him. "You okay?" he whispered. Ethan nodded cautiously. "Your parents are impressive," the man added quietly. "Sharp." Ethan studied him. "You're not just a passenger, are you?" The man smiled faintly. "Let's just say I'm here on a story." "What kind of story?" The man's eyes twinkled. "One about what happens when people who think they're in charge get too comfortable." Twist. Ethan's mind caught it instantly. This guy wasn't random. He wasn't some tourist heading to New York. His demeanor, the way he spoke, how he didn't reach for his phone. He was observing, like it was his job. "I'm Sam," the man said. "New York Times. Investigative desk." Ethan's breath caught for a moment. "You're kidding." "Not even close. I was already researching discriminatory behavior on airlines. Looks like I hit the jackpot with this flight." Ahead of them, the captain turned back toward Heather. "Given the lack of written complaints and the fact that multiple passengers have observed nothing disruptive, I'm choosing not to relocate this family." Heather stiffened. "With respect, Captain, I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft. I have discretion." "You do," Nolan said. "When there's a safety issue or clear disruption. Neither seems present here." She opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Meanwhile, Chloe's TikTok stream crossed 6,000 viewers. Her phone, propped discreetly on a neck pillow, continued recording everything. Comments flooded in. "She really said, 'cultural smells'? They didn't even eat yet, WTF. I hope that lady gets fired on the spot." Ethan glanced down at his own phone. His inbox was exploding. Group chats, DMs, reposts. This wasn't going away. Danielle looked across the aisle and caught the eyes of the woman in the navy cardigan from earlier. The woman offered a small, supportive nod. Danielle gave her a faint smile. She was calculating now, building a file of details in her head. Times, quotes, reactions. This would not be swept under the rug. Not this time. Heather took a step back and turned toward the galley. Her shoulders were square, but the twitch in her fingers betrayed her. Sam, still seated beside Ethan, leaned in again. "Your father. He's keeping something close to the chest, isn't he?" Ethan didn't reply. "I've seen that look before. The kind of man who waits until the exact moment when it matters most to play his hand." Ethan looked ahead at his father, who sat calm, composed, as though the chaos unfolding around him was simply background noise. "He's been through worse," Ethan whispered. Sam nodded slowly. "That's what I figured." At that moment, a flight attendant from the back walked briskly down the aisle. Not Heather. A younger woman, Ava Chen, her name tag read, approached the captain with a tablet. "Captain, just so you're aware, we've had 2 more passengers express support for the Carters. No complaints logged. And," she hesitated, lowering her voice slightly, "someone's streaming live from the cabin. It's going viral." Nolan exhaled through his nose. "Figures. Thank you." Heather reappeared from the galley, her face slightly flushed. She shot a glance toward the Carters and then toward Ava, who looked away quickly. Danielle leaned toward her husband. "She's unraveling." "She's going to double down," Elijah murmured. "People like her don't back off. They escalate. And we stay the course. Even now?" He turned his head just enough to meet her gaze, especially now. At that moment, Chloe whispered into her phone, now reaching 7,400 viewers. "Y'all, the mom just quoted FAA law like it was scripture. The dad, he hasn't raised his voice once, but he just knows something. I swear this feels like a movie." In the row behind, Sam hit record on his hidden mic. He'd already gotten more than enough for a column, but this was going to be front page. As the plane continued eastward, the cabin settled, on the surface, but tension still hummed beneath every interaction. Ethan opened his notes app and began to type. Flight 3298, discrimination log, 12:17 p.m. Initial confrontation initiated by Heather G. 12:21 p.m. No confirmed complaints presented. 12:25 p.m. FAA regulations cited by Danielle Carter, 12:29 p.m. Captain sides with Carters. 12:30 p.m. Passenger support growing. 12:32 p.m. NYT reporter confirmed on board. His fingers hovered for a second. Then he typed. 12:34 p.m. My father still hasn't said who he is. Captain Nolan returned to the cockpit, but the damage had already been done. The cabin had become a hive of whispers, sideways glances, and flickering screens. A few passengers voiced sympathy for the Carters, nodding quietly, offering encouraging smiles. Others, however, shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable, not because of the family's presence, but because their worldview was being challenged. In row 9, a middle-aged man in a business suit muttered under his breath, "They should have just moved. It's not that big of a deal." His seatmate, a woman with a pearl bracelet and French twist hairstyle, nodded. "This is why flights get delayed. Some people think they're above following directions." The murmurs weren't loud, but they were growing, and Heather heard them. She walked briskly back toward the galley, pausing halfway to flash a tight smile to the sympathetic passengers. Her posture stiffened as she keyed her radio. "This is Heather Grant requesting immediate cabin authority consultation," she whispered. "Captain Nolan has overstepped on crew discretion, requesting procedural override protocol." She didn't know it yet, but the request was being recorded. Ava Chen, standing just out of sight near the beverage cart, had begun documenting everything on her backup tablet. Heather's tone, the misuse of terms, and the manipulative framing would all become evidence later. Meanwhile, Danielle Carter's eyes hadn't left her tablet screen. Her fingers moved quickly, navigating through FAA documentation, airline employee manuals, and customer service protocols. Elijah sat quietly, his eyes closed, as if meditating. Ethan tapped on his phone, capturing timestamps and audio clips. Danielle stopped suddenly. "Elijah," she whispered, leaning in. "Look at this." He opened one eye. "She logged the incident," Danielle said, tilting the screen toward him. "It's already in the system. I accessed it through the in-flight portal. Her report is timestamped 20 minutes ago." Elijah leaned in slightly, his tone low. "What does it say?" Danielle scrolled down, her jaw tightening. "It says we were warned twice for disruptive verbal behavior, that passengers complained we were loud, and refused to lower our voices despite multiple requests." "We haven't spoken louder than this the entire flight," Elijah replied evenly. "It also says we removed culturally potent food items without crew permission. We haven't even opened our bag." Elijah opened his eyes fully now. "That's not a mistake. That's fabrication." Danielle nodded. "Intentional and strategic. She's pre-building a paper trail to protect herself. If this goes legal, she wants it on record that she acted to preserve peace." Elijah sat up straighter. "We're going to need a copy of that." "I've already screen recorded it," Danielle said, tapping her screen. "She doesn't know I can access crew logs through the guest portal. Most passengers wouldn't even try." In the back of the plane, Sam from the New York Times quietly texted a colleague. "Confirmed. Internal report contradicts observable behavior. Fabricated claims include volume, food, and aggression. High-value legal implications. Recommend fast-track review." At the front, Captain Nolan tapped his headset, his voice low. "Heather, please report to the cockpit." Heather straightened her blouse and moved with purpose. As she disappeared behind the door, tension in the cabin peaked again. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others pulled out noise-canceling headphones, trying to tune out the increasingly tense atmosphere. But there were those, like Chloe, Ava, and Sam, who were paying attention. Closely. Ethan leaned across the armrest to Danielle. "If this goes public, how big does it get?" Danielle didn't look up. "Potentially catastrophic. For her, for the airline." Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Nolan gestured for Heather to sit. "Heather," he began, "you filed a preliminary incident report. That's protocol." "Yes, sir. But the allegations are serious. Disruptive volume, disregard of instructions, unauthorized food. I need to know exactly who reported these." Heather hesitated. "Captain, I didn't get names. It was more of a general sentiment." I overheard complaints, sensed discomfort. Sensed? Nolan repeated, raising an eyebrow. I know how to read a cabin, Heather replied, leaning in. These passengers were visibly irritated by the Carters. I acted proactively. Proactively filing false claims isn't proactive. It's dangerous, Nolan said. We have no noise, no food. I've walked the aisle myself. Their behavior doesn't match your report. Heather bristled. With all due respect, Captain, your presence changes the dynamic. You don't see what I see when it's just crew and passengers. Nolan narrowed his eyes. You're asking me to act on your instincts. I need facts, Heather. This family's actions aren't disruptive. Your report is. If we proceed as is, we're liable. Heather's jaw tightened. I stand by my report. Nolan studied her. Then I'll need you to sign a formal confirmation. You understand that fabricating incidents is grounds for disciplinary review under FAA and company policy. She hesitated. That was not part of her plan. Outside the cockpit, Danielle pulled up the airline's crew conduct policy. Elijah, listen to this. Knowingly submitting inaccurate incident reports may result in disciplinary action, including termination. She just buried herself, Elijah replied. Ethan looked from his mother to his father. You think she'll double down? She has no choice, Danielle said. She's already committed the lie. Back near the front of the plane, Chloe's phone vibrated. Her video had surpassed 10,000 viewers. The comments section was overflowing with outrage, support, and one chilling message. I've flown with her before. Same energy, different victims. Ava walked down the aisle slowly, stopping at Elijah's row. She lowered her voice. Sir, for what it's worth, I believe you. She's been on edge since takeoff. I didn't know how to say anything until now. Danielle met her gaze. You just did. From the back of the plane, Sam uploaded a draft to the Times server. Cabin power dynamics, when discretion becomes discrimination. Captain Nolan stepped out of the cockpit, expression unreadable. He walked toward row 14 slowly, every step weighted with consequence. He's going to choose a side, Danielle whispered. No, Elijah said, eyes fixed on the captain. He's going to choose the truth. The quiet hum of the engines provided a deceptively calm backdrop as Captain Nolan returned to the cockpit once more. The tension, however, hadn't lifted. It had only grown tighter, like a rubber band pulled to its limits. Every click of a seatbelt, every ding of the intercom, seemed to echo louder than it should. Elijah Carter felt the vibration in his coat pocket first, a subtle buzz, barely audible. He reached in slowly, withdrawing his phone. A message lit up the screen. Protocol alert. Assessment phase activated. Board session begins in 45 minutes. Danielle glanced at the message as Elijah tilted the screen toward her. So, it's time, she whispered. Elijah nodded once. Let's see what the system does when it thinks it's unobserved. She turned back toward the front, scanning Heather's silhouette just outside the cockpit. The flight attendant was composed on the surface, but her stiff posture and clenched jaw betrayed a growing fear. Heather hadn't yet realized the scale of the fire she'd started, or who she'd thrown the first spark at. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone pinged with dozens of notifications. The clip Chloe had recorded from earlier had been shared to a Reddit thread on racial profiling, gaining traction fast. Ethan opened a secure folder in his phone, selected several clips he'd captured himself, clear angles, audio, timestamps, and uploaded them to a cloud drive linked to a private whistleblower channel. He paused, hesitating for just a second, then hit send to @EquityObserver, an anonymous social accountability page with 2.3 million followers. He didn't need a viral moment. He needed witnesses. Across the aisle, Ava Chen stood in the galley, pretending to review inventory on her tablet. Her eyes kept drifting toward Heather, who was pacing slowly back and forth. The intercom buzzed, but Heather didn't respond immediately. She was distracted, muttering under her breath as she scrolled through something on her device. Ava moved toward the back of the plane to retrieve extra water bottles and paused by row 20, where two off-duty crew members were seated. One, an older attendant with graying hair and a calm demeanor, glanced up as she approached. "She's unraveling," Ava whispered. The older attendant, Marissa, nodded slowly. "What's the trigger this time?" "Same pattern," Ava said. "Claims about food smells and noise. No evidence. She logged a false report before anything happened." Marissa let out a soft sigh. "That's not the first time." Ava blinked. "What do you mean?" Marissa's expression darkened. "She's had 3 prior complaints filed, 2 dismissed quietly, 1 buried. Same MO, always vague passenger discomfort, always a person of color." A chill ran down Ava's spine. "Why wasn't she disciplined?" "She's protected. Friend of someone high up," Marissa murmured. "But this one's not going to disappear." As Ava walked back down the aisle, she glanced at the Carters. Danielle was typing furiously on her tablet, cross-referencing FAA regulations with internal company policy. Elijah remained unreadable, arms crossed loosely, one ankle resting calmly over the other knee. But Ethan? Ethan looked like a storm waiting to land. He leaned toward Ava as she passed. "Can I ask you something?" She stopped. "Of course. Do flight attendants get trained on how to spot bias? Or like unintentional discrimination?" Ava hesitated, then answered honestly. "We get a module once a year. It's brief, mostly procedural. Heather passed it like everyone else." "She doesn't act like she learned anything," Ethan said. "No," Ava replied. "She acts like she never had to." Up front, Chloe's stream had surpassed 12,000 viewers. She whispered to her audience, "Okay, y'all, something's shifting. The crew looks rattled. That lady, Heather, she's not in control anymore. And the family, they look calm, too calm, like they know something." In row 9, the man in the business suit shifted uncomfortably. He noticed the mood of the cabin changing, and with it, the balance of sympathy. The narrative wasn't tilting in Heather's favor anymore. Elijah checked the time. If the board meeting was starting in under an hour, the CEO would already be briefed. Legal would be watching the stream. Compliance officers would be pulling passenger logs and internal recordings. The system was in motion now, whether Heather realized it or not. Danielle leaned closer. "They're going to call." "They already have," Elijah said. Another buzz came through his phone. "Board chair, status requested. Will patch direct audio if escalation occurs." He typed back quickly. "Not yet. Let them keep walking into the dark." Ava returned to the galley and discreetly opened the in-flight crew comms log. Heather's incident report still sat unedited. The fabrications were intact. So was the timestamp, logged before any verbal warnings or documented interaction. She tapped her own notes app and began documenting. 1:02 p.m. Passenger accused of noise violation. No supporting witness observed. 1:04 p.m. Accusation of food odors. No food opened. 1:06 p.m. Heather files preliminary complaint with fabricated claims. 1:10 p.m. Passenger Ethan Carter uploads real-time video to external platform. 1:15 p.m. Internal crew concern raised. Off record. This log would be critical later. At 1:19 p.m., a new voice broke the silence. Walter Hayes, seated in row 16, a retired businessman with a calm presence and steady eyes, raised his voice just enough to be heard. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I've been watching, and I don't see a disturbance. I see a calm family being targeted. If this flight ends in another viral mess, it won't be because of them." He didn't raise his phone. He didn't rant. He just spoke with the weight of someone who had nothing to gain but felt compelled to say what needed saying. Heather turned toward him, startled. And for the first time, her confidence cracked. Not shattered, not yet, but visible. Like a fine line through a sheet of glass, hinting at a collapse to come. Heather stood in the aisle like a statue about to snap. She had just returned from the cockpit, visibly rattled from her tense exchange with Captain Nolan. Her steps were sharper now, her voice crisper. A thin layer of control coated her words like icing on a cracked cake. "I've given you every opportunity to comply," she said, her tone clipped and loud enough for surrounding rows to hear. "If you don't agree to move voluntarily, law enforcement will be waiting for you upon landing." Gasps rose in scattered pockets of the cabin. The words law enforcement had a way of chilling the air, especially when aimed at a black family with no provocation. Danielle didn't flinch. "Based on what violation, Ms. Grant?" Heather's eyes flashed. "Disruption, interference, hostility toward crew members." Elijah turned to her slowly. "We've done none of those things, and your accusations are being recorded by multiple witnesses." Chloe, still nestled 2 rows ahead, whispered to her phone. "Y'all, she just threatened them with airport police for sitting quietly. This is going to explode." Her TikTok stream passed 17,000 viewers in real time. Across the aisle, Walter Hayes shook his head. "Ma'am, I've watched every moment. You're overstepping." "I'm handling a safety matter," Heather snapped at him. Walter's eyes were calm. "No, you're trying to punish quiet resistance." The tension hit its boiling point. Phones were now openly visible, some lifted high for better angles. A hum of whispers, gasps, and angry murmurs filled the rows. Still seated beside Ethan, the man in the beanie, Sam, the New York Times journalist, typed furiously on his phone. His message to the editorial desk was short but clear. Urgent. Flight 3298. Civil rights incident unfolding in real time. Crew escalation appears racially motivated. Live footage spreading. Request immediate legal watch. He hit send. Meanwhile, in row 10B, a man with silver-rimmed glasses and a black sports coat adjusted his tray table and opened a sleek black laptop. His name tag wasn't visible, but his demeanor was clinical, alert. He hadn't spoken since the plane left the gate, and no one had paid much attention to him. That was by design. He opened an encrypted application and quickly typed into a secure chat. Situation confirmed. Passenger discrimination incident in progress. Subject, Heather Grant actively escalating conflict. Recommend live compliance flag. Legal standby. A message popped up almost instantly. Confirmed. Patch direct report. Legal monitoring activated. Priority review initiated. He hit a command. A blinking red icon lit up the corner of his screen. Live legal observation. Active Elijah, still composed, leaned slightly toward Danielle. "She's losing control. She's cornered." "Cornered people make reckless decisions," Danielle whispered back. "That's what we have to prepare for now." Ava Chen passed behind them, subtly tapping her tablet with shaky fingers. She'd just received a message from Marissa, the veteran flight attendant in row 20. "Heads up. Man in 10B is legal. Corporate. Quiet mode. Watch for signals." Ava glanced forward. The man didn't move. But now that she knew, it made sense. He was there to observe. Maybe more. Back at the front of the cabin, Captain Nolan hadn't re-emerged. That silence, more than anything, kept the cabin in limbo. Heather, sensing time slipping away, tried once more. "This is my final offer," she announced to the Carters, her voice brittle but booming. "Comply now, or face official removal. You're interfering with flight operations." Danielle rose slowly from her seat. Elijah gently reached for her arm, but she shook her head. "No more waiting." She turned to face Heather directly, her tone civil but commanding. "If you have specific allegations of interference, state them. Cite the regulation, and be prepared to defend them under federal scrutiny." Heather's voice rose an octave. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening," Danielle said coolly. "I'm informing you that every word you speak is now being transmitted to thousands of people across multiple platforms, and at least one federal observer is already watching." That landed like a grenade. Heather blinked, confused. "Federal... what?" Sam leaned toward Ethan. "Your mom just dropped the hammer." Ethan smiled faintly. "She's just warming up." Heather took a step back. For the first time, true hesitation crossed her face. At the back of the cabin, Ava Chen received another message from Marissa. Legal just flagged her. She's under formal compliance watch. Everything she says now is logged. Heather reached for her in-flight tablet, intending to double down. But as her fingers hovered, a new alert flashed across her screen. Internal flag. Do not escalate. Priority compliance review pending. Her stomach dropped. Danielle caught the flicker of fear in her eyes and pressed. Go ahead. File your report. But understand that falsifying crew documentation is a federal offense under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Heather opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Elijah finally spoke. I suggest you return to your duties, Ms. Grant. The situation no longer needs your interpretation. Chloe whispered to her camera. Y'all, she froze. She literally froze. Her viewer count surged past 24,000. From 10B, the legal observer calmly logged the following. 1:44 p.m. Threat of forced removal made without lawful basis, 1:46 p.m. Passenger Carter invoked federal regulation, 1:47 p.m. Heather Grant displayed signs of distress. Observed reading compliance alert, 1:48 p.m. No further escalation. Observer recommends continued passive monitoring. Danielle sat down again, slowly. Ethan leaned in. You think she's done? Danielle exhaled. Not yet, but the power's leaking through her hands faster than she can hold it. Heather stood still for a few seconds longer. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back toward the galley. The first crack had become a rupture, and now, the system was watching. The soft chime of the intercom returned, but this time, it wasn't from the cockpit. It came from the crew panel, a high-priority channel normally reserved for in-flight emergencies or operational red alerts. Heather, still standing behind the curtain at the galley, froze when her comm unit vibrated against her hip. She fumbled slightly, pulling it out. Flight 3298, this is Operations Control. Patch to Captain Nolan. Priority Alpha. External directive from Executive Command. She stared at the words. Priority Alpha? In over a decade of flying, she had never seen that level of directive used, let alone mid-flight. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the relay button. In the cockpit, Captain Nolan's earpiece buzzed. Flight 3298, this is Janet Harrison, CEO. Do you copy? Nolan blinked. Copy. This is Nolan. Who is the passenger in row 14C? The captain hesitated, suddenly piecing things together. Passenger name is Elijah Carter, traveling with wife and son. There was a pause. Then Janet's voice returned. Steady, cold. Put him on the headset, now. Nolan turned to his co-pilot. Take controls. I need a word with our VIP. He rose and made his way into the cabin. Meanwhile, Heather paced silently, her face tight. She hadn't heard the content of the conversation, only the tone. But she sensed it wasn't going to favor her. She reached for her tablet, nervously refreshing the incident report log. Nothing had changed, but she had. Captain Nolan approached Elijah's row, bent down, and spoke quietly. Mr. Carter, we've received a direct communication from corporate. The CEO is requesting to speak with you immediately. Danielle raised an eyebrow. That was fast. Elijah nodded, rising smoothly. Of course. The cabin held its collective breath as Elijah followed the captain to the front. Chloe whispered into her stream. Something major is happening. The captain just escorted him. This is huge. Back in the galley, Heather opened her crew messaging app, hoping to get ahead of the situation. What she saw instead was far worse. A new document had appeared in the compliance review feed. A leak. A PDF titled Executive Oversight, Conduct Protection List Q1. She tapped it. Her name was there. Grant, Heather, protected status under Board VP Marshall Greaves. She nearly dropped the device. Everyone in the industry had heard whispers of the list. A shadow file of employees who had been shielded from disciplinary actions due to internal connections. The list was unofficial, never acknowledged. And now it was live in the compliance system. Somebody had leaked it, and she was on it. Ava Chen, standing behind the beverage cart, caught the flicker of horror on Heather's face. She tilted her own tablet, already seeing the same document. Her screen also showed a message at the top. Distribution restricted. Legal review in progress. Do not forward. But it was too late. The leak had spread through the internal crew comms platform. Screenshots were being taken, circulated, whispered about. In the cockpit, Elijah slipped the headset over his ears. "This is Elijah Carter," he said calmly. Janet Harrison's voice came through with surgical precision. "Mr. Carter, you are not scheduled on this flight. We understand this is a live assessment." "I didn't expect it to escalate," Elijah replied. "But your employee made it impossible not to act. We're opening a full file. Legal has already activated protocol." Elijah's tone stayed level. "I want her report preserved exactly as submitted. No edits." "It's already locked," Janet replied. "Chain of custody logged. No deletions allowed." Elijah nodded. "Good, because the world is already watching. I suggest we stay ahead of the curve." There was a pause. "Sir," Janet said, quieter now, "the leak just happened. The document list." "I saw," Elijah said. "She was protected by Greaves. This could get political." "Then let it," he said. "The system needs purging." Meanwhile, Ethan checked his phone again. Twitter was trending with #Flight3298 and #CarterFamilyFlight. Reddit had threads reaching the front page. Clips from Chloe's stream, combined with Ethan's earlier footage, had already been compiled into a 4-minute highlight reel on YouTube. Viewer count, 310,000 in less than 20 minutes. Back in the cabin, Danielle's tablet pinged. She opened it to see a forwarded message from her firm's compliance partner. "FYI, list has leaked. Your flight has full attention. VP Greaves is under internal audit as of 1:56 p.m. She turned to Ava, who had just passed by again. "It's out, isn't it?" Ava nodded, voice hushed. "We all saw it." "And Heather? She's trying to act like she didn't, but she knows." At the back of the plane, Sam from the Times updated his editor again. Twist confirmed. Attendant is on protected conduct list linked to VP Marshall Greaves. Legal just launched audit. Potential for corporate cover-up scandal. National coverage imminent. Up front, Elijah handed the headset back to Captain Nolan. "Thank you," he said simply. Captain Nolan didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. "Should I inform her?" he asked. Elijah shook his head. "Let the truth do it." Nolan returned to the cockpit, silent. Elijah walked back to his seat, every passenger watching. Chloe whispered, "Y'all, he looks like the man who just won." As he sat, Danielle leaned in. "Was that Janet?" "She's moving," he said, "and the board is already watching." Heather, gripping her tablet, refreshed again. Now the compliance dashboard bore a red flag next to her name. "Under review, audit lock enabled." And finally, she realized, this was no longer about a disagreement. It was about exposure. The cabin buzzed with uneasy silence, the kind that thrums beneath the surface, waiting for something to break it. Elijah Carter returned to his seat with the poise of a man walking out of a courtroom, calm, measured, unshaken. He eased back into his seat, adjusted his cuffs, and took a breath. Danielle glanced sideways. "Is it time?" He nodded. "It's time." Chloe's voice whispered across the aisle. "Y'all, something's coming. I can feel it." Heather was pacing again near the galley, phone in hand, eyes darting across the screen. The document leak had destroyed her composure. Her name, linked to a protected conduct list, had changed everything. She no longer looked like someone in charge. She looked like someone cornered by their own reflection. Ethan tapped into his phone, swiped through the security folder, and opened the live stream app he rarely used. His fingers hesitated only for a moment before he hit Go Live. The screen blinked once, then again. "Live. Ethan Carter 17 is now streaming." He angled the camera toward himself, steady as stone. "My name is Ethan Carter," he began. "You may have seen what's happening on this flight. The woman sitting across from me is my mom, Danielle Carter, civil rights attorney. The man next to her, my dad, Elijah Carter, chairman of the Board Ethics Committee at Southwest Airlines. There it was. In row 11, Chloe gasped audibly. "Oh my God!" The camera shifted slightly as Ethan turned it toward his father, who gave a subtle nod. The kind of nod that didn't need grandeur to carry weight. The kind that said, "Yes, it's true. And yes, I've been watching." Ava Chen, standing at mid-cabin, froze in place. Her tablet buzzed seconds later. Notification from internal crew chat. The group thread exploded. "Carter is board ethics chair. He's on the plane. This is real. I just checked the corporate profile. It's him." Heather took one step forward before her knees buckled slightly. She gripped the edge of a jump seat for balance, mouth ajar. Danielle rose from her seat, slowly, but with unmistakable presence. "For those of you watching online or here in the cabin," she said, voice carrying with no mic, "my husband and I conduct quarterly anonymous assessments of our airline's culture, training, and compliance. We fly coach. We interact like normal passengers. And we watch how your employees behave when they think no one's looking." The effect was seismic. Passengers blinked, stunned. Some gasped. Others whispered among themselves. Heather stood frozen, tablet clutched in her hand like a lifeline she could no longer use. Ethan turned the camera back to his father. "Dad, anything to say to the viewers?" Elijah's gaze didn't leave Heather. "Power isn't proven by barking orders," he said, voice quiet but heavy. "It's revealed when you think no one will hold you accountable." From row 10B, Sam, New York Times, sent his story draft live. The headline was short, explosive, and already writing itself across media platforms. "He owns the ethics. Southwest board chairman tested his own airline, and it failed." A push alert popped up on thousands of phones within seconds. In row 7, a businessman who had earlier muttered about just following orders now turned pale. Chloe's live stream passed 34,000 viewers and climbing fast. Walter Hayes stood from his seat near the back. He raised his voice just enough to reach the front. "For the record," he said clearly, "this family has conducted themselves with more professionalism and restraint than I've seen in 20 years of business travel." A few passengers nodded in agreement. Someone clapped once, then stopped, unsure. Danielle raised a hand, signaling silence. "This isn't about applause," she said. "It's about accountability." Heather finally found her voice. I didn't know." "That," Elijah replied, "was the point." She shook her head. "If I had known..." Danielle stepped forward. "If you had known he was powerful, you would have treated us differently. That's the exact bias we're here to uncover." Heather looked around as though searching for an exit that didn't exist. The man in 10B, the legal observer, quietly tapped his keyboard. 2:08 p.m. Identity confirmed. Carter equals chair. Live feed authenticated. Emotional response from crew observed. Heather Grant under full audit hold. Incident log locked. In the cockpit, Captain Nolan received the update via his earpiece. He exhaled, long and slow, then spoke into the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a situation that's gained attention both here and beyond this aircraft. On behalf of this crew and this airline, I'd like to extend a formal apology to Mr. Carter and his family. This matter is under internal review. Please remain seated. We'll begin descent shortly." His voice cut through the cabin like a reset button, but there was no returning to before. Heather stepped back slowly, collapsing into a jump seat. Her headset buzzed with an internal message. "Report to corporate ethics upon landing. Do not initiate further passenger contact. Immediate debrief required." Danielle returned to her seat. Chloe whispered, "They changed the entire tone of this flight, just by existing." Ethan ended the live stream with a final shot of his parents sitting tall, serene, untouched by the chaos they had weathered. The final frame read, "This is what real power looks like." Captain Nolan stepped out of the cockpit once again, But this time, he didn't hesitate. The weight of the revelation, who Elijah Carter really was, had finally shifted the balance of the entire flight. His voice had a different tone now, lower, firmer, the kind of tone pilots used when they were fully in command. He stood at the front of the cabin and addressed everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pausing only long enough for full attention. "As captain of this flight, I take full responsibility for the safety and integrity of everyone aboard. After reviewing the situation and with updated information, I am formally reversing the prior relocation request issued to Mr. Carter and his family. They will remain in their seats for the remainder of this flight." Scattered claps broke out across the cabin. Passengers who had remained silent now felt emboldened. Chloe's live stream picked up the noise, and her chat exploded. "That's right, about time." She got exposed on live air. Carter family staying pied-à-terre. Heather, still slumped in the jump seat near the galley, closed her eyes. It was happening. Not just a reprimand, not just a scolding. This was unraveling at a velocity she couldn't control. She reached again for her in-flight tablet, hoping for some instruction, some corporate save. Instead, another message blinked into view. "Crew member Heather Grant. Immediate suspension enacted. Corporate oversight activated. Disengage from passengers and await further directive." Ava Chen, a few feet away, caught the notice on her own tablet and blinked in disbelief. She had never seen a crew suspension issued mid-flight. Ever. Captain Nolan continued, now addressing the crew channel over the internal speaker. "Heather Grant, you are hereby relieved of all passenger-facing duties for the remainder of this flight. You will submit your official incident report upon landing, under full legal oversight." The words rang out with quiet devastation. Passengers gasped. Some looked around, stunned that such authority was being exercised in real time. Others exchanged satisfied glances, as if watching a long-delayed justice finally land. Danielle leaned in to Elijah. "That may be the first time I've ever heard those words said aloud." Mid-air. Elijah remained still. Accountability should never wait for landing. Heather stood slowly, eyes narrowed. "I was doing my job," she muttered, mostly to herself. But she wasn't invisible. Walter Hayes stood again, taller this time. "No, you were abusing your role," he said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "And you got caught." The cabin fell into silence again. Then, another chime. But this wasn't from the cockpit or crew systems. This was new. A clear, authoritative female voice came through the aircraft's announcement system, patched directly from corporate headquarters. "This is Janet Harrison, CEO of Southwest Airlines." Heather's head snapped up. "I am addressing you live from our operations center in Dallas," the voice continued. "This message is directed to all passengers and crew on Flight 3298. We are currently reviewing a serious ethics and compliance breach involving the treatment of Mr. Elijah Carter and his family. Mr. Carter serves as our chairman of the board's ethics committee, and he was on board as part of an anonymous audit. What transpired is unacceptable." The entire cabin was deathly still. Every head turned toward the speaker panels overhead. Heather's lips parted slightly, pale and dry. "We want to be transparent," Janet went on. "The crew member involved, Heather Grant, has been suspended effective immediately. A full internal investigation is now underway, and all digital records, audio and video, will be preserved for legal review." The voice paused before the final blow. "Southwest Airlines is committed to fairness, dignity, and equal treatment of all passengers. What happened today contradicts those values. We will do better. Thank you." The intercom clicked off. Danielle leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "I almost wish we weren't still flying. I'd love to see her walk off this plane." "Give it 20 minutes, Elijah said. "It'll be a walk of headlines." Chloe's stream now passed 57,000 viewers. "Y'all, the CEO just got on the plane. Not literally, but like she spoke to us. Over the speakers. Live. You ever seen something like this? Because I haven't." At the rear, Heather's fingers moved toward her tablet again. A prompt was already waiting. "Please begin your official statement. Incident report code 74B. She opened the template. A blank screen. A blinking cursor. The first field. Description of incident in your own words. She stared at it for several seconds, then typed, "Passenger refused to..." Her hands paused. The cursor blinked again. Danielle glanced backward as if sensing something. "She's writing it now, isn't she?" "She'll lie again," Ethan murmured. "She has to. It's the only thing she knows." But Heather didn't finish the sentence. She deleted it, typed something else, then deleted again. Her breath came quicker. The weight of her earlier choices pressed against her like gravity. Ava leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to dig deeper. Just tell the truth." Heather didn't look at her. She simply muttered, "You think truth will save me now?" Ava didn't answer. The final twist arrived in the form of defiance. Heather closed the tablet and typed instead, "I was following training protocols and exercising reasonable discretion. I acted in accordance with my understanding of crew authority and maintained that I did nothing wrong." She hit submit. No apology, no admission. Danielle's tablet pinged seconds later. She scanned the screen and said flatly, "She refused accountability." Elijah didn't flinch. "Then she's already written her own professional obituary." Sam, now receiving a direct feed from corporate PR, uploaded his next dispatch. Update. Suspended attendant refused admission of fault in official statement. Legal sources indicate this will trigger immediate grounds for dismissal post-landing. Heather stared straight ahead now, empty-eyed. Her career had fractured beneath the weight of ego, and she still thought denial would hold the pieces together. The news cycle spun faster than the plane's cruising speed. By the time Flight 3298 crossed into East Coast airspace, the outside world had already caught fire. CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News were flashing breaking banners across their homepages. Viral flight discrimination incident dominated social media, with hashtag flight racism, hashtag Carter audit, and hashtag chairman on board trending simultaneously across platforms. Elijah sat in silence, watching the ripple effect from 30,000 feet. His phone vibrated again and again. Texts from board members, journalists, compliance officers, political contacts, even an old law school professor who'd seen the live stream and simply wrote, "You built this moment perfectly." He didn't respond. Danielle scrolled through her firm's encrypted legal thread. Screenshots of Heather Grant's suspension order were already circulating internally. Then came the bombshell: leaked HR files, whistleblower accounts, and an anonymous submission that landed squarely in the hands of the Carter family's legal team. Heather Grant had a history: 5 previous internal complaints, 3 related to racial profiling, 2 involving excessive use of relocation orders, all targeting Black or Latino families. Every single one dismissed. Ava approached Danielle discreetly with her tablet flipped outward. "You're going to want to see this," she whispered. Danielle scrolled through the displayed document. 5? And she's still flying? "She was protected," Ava said softly. "We all knew it. No one could touch her." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Protected by whom?" That answer came not from Ava, but from Sam, seated behind Ethan. He leaned forward, his eyes glued to his laptop screen. "I have it," he muttered. Ethan turned toward him. "Have what?" "The name." The journalist adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and angled the screen for Ethan and Danielle to see. A whistleblower file had just been leaked to the Times editorial desk, flagged as urgent, internal political shielding allegation. Sam read aloud, low and deliberate. Heather Grant was retained despite repeated ethics violations due to internal protection from Board Vice Chairman Marshall Greaves. Danielle's jaw set. Of course. Elijah turned, hearing the name. Greaves. It wasn't a surprise, but it was a confirmation. Greaves had always been a thorn. Smooth, calculating, the kind of board member who played golf with senators and spoke in vague philosophies about legacy risk mitigation. Years ago, he'd attempted to block Elijah's elevation to chair of the ethics committee. They'd clashed repeatedly in policy sessions. Greaves favored discretion and shielding. Elijah demanded transparency and reform. "This is retaliation," Danielle whispered. "Greaves saw your ethics audits as a threat to his power base. Heather was his proxy." Ethan blinked. "You're saying all this? Everything on this flight? It wasn't just about bias, it was politics." "Exactly," Elijah said. "Greaves didn't just cover for her, he weaponized her." Sam typed furiously. "He's finished. I'm attaching the documents now. This story isn't just about a racist flight attendant anymore. It's about systemic protection from the top." At corporate headquarters, a very different kind of storm was brewing. Janet Harrison, the CEO, stood in the emergency boardroom, her face illuminated by the glow of a dozen screens. Each showed a live feed, news tickers, Twitter threads, internal chat rooms, Slack leaks, even a window tracking TikTok views in real time. The number passed 2.7 million. "Where's Greaves?" she asked. Her legal counsel hesitated. "He's not responding." "Find him," Janet said. "I want him on record before this plane lands." Within minutes, her team launched an internal digital freeze. Greaves's access was locked. His corporate email went dark. An alert went out to all departments. "Do not act on any directive from Vice Chairman Marshall Greaves until further notice. Ongoing investigation underway." Back on the plane, Captain Nolan received a private call from operations. "Captain, be advised," the voice on the line said. "Upon arrival, Mr. Carter and his family are to be escorted to a private terminal lounge. Media will be restricted. Legal team inbound. CEO Harrison is coordinating in-person debrief. Flight crew will be rotated off immediately for post-incident statements." Nolan nodded slowly. "Understood." He looked out the cockpit window. New York was just coming into view. The descent would begin soon. Danielle opened her email and saw a new message flagged as confidential, legal briefing update. The subject line read, "Preliminary summary of whistleblower claims. Heather Grant and Vice Chairman Marshall Greaves." She read silently for 30 seconds, then whispered, "We have enough for deposition." Ethan looked up. "Already?" Danielle's voice was steady. "We don't need a court. We need policy." Elijah turned to his son. "This is how change happens, Ethan. Not with shouting, but with silence followed by evidence." Heather, seated in a corner of the galley, was visibly shaken. Her tablet buzzed again. She opened the latest instruction. "Please prepare for HR debrief upon landing. Legal counsel required. Submit full personal statement within 2 hours." She stared at it blankly. Ava approached slowly, unsure whether to say anything. In the end, she only said, "There's still a chance to tell the truth." Heather didn't reply. Meanwhile, Chloe's stream reached 89,000 concurrent viewers. She spoke softly to the camera, summarizing the events so far like a seasoned anchor. "They tried to move a black family for being too quiet. One of them turns out to own the policy handbook. The crew freaked out. Then we found out the flight attendant had done this before, 5 times. And her boss, a big-time VP, had been covering for her." She paused. "This flight just exposed a system, and people are mad, really mad." In the rows behind, murmurs grew louder. Passengers shared clips, compared timelines, followed threads as if tracking the story in real time, which they were. Walter Hayes spoke up once again. "I've been flying for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like this. But I'm glad I was here, because now, nobody can pretend this doesn't happen." Sam hit publish on his final draft of the hour. The headline was blistering. "From Cabin to Crisis, Southwest Flight Exposes Executive Shielding of Racist Crew Member." By the time the plane touched down, the article had already been shared 180,000 times. As the wheels met the tarmac, Elijah turned to Danielle. "It's about to get louder." She smiled faintly. "Good. Let them hear everything." The wheels screeched as Flight 3298 touched down at LaGuardia Airport. The jolt was mechanical, but in the cabin, the emotional shift was seismic. For the Carter family, the landing marked more than the end of a flight. It marked the beginning of reckoning. Passengers remained seated in stiff silence, unsure whether to applaud or brace for more. The intercom crackled once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've landed safely in New York. Please remain seated. Law enforcement and airline officials will be meeting us at the gate. Disembarkation will proceed in stages." Ethan glanced across the aisle. Even those who had doubted them earlier now avoided eye contact, guilt heavy on their faces. Heather, still seated by the galley, clutched her tablet as if it were a shield, but it could no longer protect her. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, Elijah received a message. "Boardroom secure. You may proceed with statement." He stood. Danielle gave a small nod, placing a hand briefly over his. Chloe's live stream had resumed as soon as wheels hit tarmac. "Guys, it's not over. Mr. Carter is standing. Something's about to go down. Again." Elijah didn't use the intercom. He didn't need to. His voice carried with the weight of earned authority. "For those of you who may be wondering," he began, turning slightly to address as much of the cabin as he could, "this flight was never about a seat assignment. It wasn't about food smells or noise levels. It wasn't even about one flight attendant's bias." He paused. "This was a test." Gasps. Audible now. A man in first class murmured, "What?" "For the past 6 months, my family and I have conducted a series of anonymous flights as part of a larger internal audit, what we call the Cultural Competency Verification Program." He let it sit. Every eye was on him. 60 employees, across multiple roles, flight attendants, gate agents, supervisors, each unaware they were being observed, each unaware they were being assessed for bias, procedural integrity, and adherence to federal protections. Heather's breathing quickened. Elijah continued, calm and cold. "Heather Grant is the 8th failure, and the most public, but not the last." Danielle rose now, her voice taking over seamlessly. "We've compiled over 600 hours of audio and video, passenger interviews, employee patterns, real behavior when no one thinks the cameras are rolling. Because that's where truth lives, in the unguarded moment." Sam's fingers flew across his keyboard. His next headline was already forming. In the front cabin, a representative from corporate, wearing a navy suit with a gold Southwest insignia, entered quietly, standing at attention. He didn't interrupt. Danielle nodded toward him. "You can take that back to Dallas." Then came the final hammer. Elijah looked directly at Chloe, who instinctively zoomed in. "We're not just collecting data. We're about to vote on the most sweeping reforms in company history. A full board session is being convened today, and we will be recommending immediate restructuring of the managerial hierarchy, including the removal of executives who shield bias and suppress complaints." Passengers murmured, louder now. Chloe whispered into her phone, "Y'all, he's not playing. They're going after the top." Danielle raised her tablet. "Vice Chairman Marshall Greaves has already been suspended pending investigation. His protection of Ms. Grant and others has compromised the ethical structure of this airline. The audit has proven a systemic failure at the leadership level." Heather closed her eyes. The truth had finally reached her. From the gate, CEO Janet Harrison connected via a secured feed patched into the aircraft's comm system. "This is CEO Harrison," her voice echoed again. "Effective immediately, we are suspending all management involved in the concealment of misconduct. A special committee is being formed to oversee cultural reform. Mr. Carter's findings will form the foundation." The cabin burst into low exclamations. Passengers, once silent, now clapped, some cautiously, others enthusiastically. One man in row 3 stood and said, "You just saved more than a flight. You saved a standard." Janet continued, "To our passengers, we apologize. This was not just a bad flight. It was a reflection of deeper problems, and that is unacceptable. Expect a better Southwest, one built on action, not words." Heather's tablet buzzed again. Final message. "You are hereby removed from active status. Termination review initiated." She didn't resist. There was nothing left to fight. Walter Hayes stood once more, his voice steady. "Mr. Carter, if I may?" Elijah nodded. Walter continued, "I've flown with your airline for decades. Today was the first time I felt like someone in your position actually saw what we experience. Thank you." Elijah's smile was soft, but didn't linger. He sat down. Danielle whispered, "It's done." "Not yet," Elijah replied. "We still have to rebuild what they broke." Ethan watched them both, silent, awestruck. He opened his phone again and posted the family's official statement. "Discrimination doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers policy. Today, we made it loud enough for the world to hear." The Carter family sat in a private lounge at LaGuardia, the soft hum of air conditioning doing little to cut the tension that lingered in the air. The jet bridge had emptied, the passengers disembarked, and the crew separated for questioning. Yet even here, behind closed doors, shielded from cameras and headlines, the weight of what had happened still pressed heavily. Janet Harrison appeared on the large screen in front of them, live from Southwest's Crisis Center in Dallas. Her voice was tired but resolute. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she began, "on behalf of the entire board and every employee who believes in doing better, I want to thank you, not just for enduring today, but for orchestrating a system to hold us accountable." Elijah gave a small nod. It was overdue. "We agree," Janet said. "Which is why we're implementing everything you outlined in the ethics report, effective immediately." She clicked to the next slide. It read in bold letters, "New Sky Protocol." Southwest Airlines Cultural Accountability Program. Danielle leaned forward. "List the components." Janet's expression sharpened with purpose. "As per your team's recommendations." She began to list them, one by one. AI-powered cabin audio analysis to detect discriminatory language and tone in real time. Automated behavioral audits triggered by passenger feedback patterns. Bias flag alerts transmitted to onboard supervisors and operations within 30 seconds. Mandatory annual cultural competency certification for all frontline employees. Live compliance monitors assigned randomly across flights with concealed identities. Zero tolerance enforcement. Documented infractions result in immediate disciplinary hearings. Danielle nodded. "And funding?" Janet gave a slight smile. "That's where we're humbled, because the Carter family's trust has offered something else." Elijah spoke now. "We're pledging an additional $50 million to implement and accelerate these changes, on one condition." Janet already knew the terms. "Benchmarks," Elijah continued. "We want performance thresholds, 98% incident detection accuracy, 95% passenger approval across demographics, and a full elimination of protected shielding within 12 months. Janet didn't hesitate. "Agreed. We'll meet the numbers, or we'll lose your investment." Danielle looked at her, eyes steely. "You'll lose more than that. You'll lose your future." The two women exchanged a moment of silent respect. Back on the plane, as crew members filed out one by one, Heather Grant sat alone, her flight bag at her feet. Her face was drawn, her hair loose from the usual tight bun. She'd been offered two choices: termination for cause or reassignment under severe scrutiny. She had chosen a third option. The phone in her hand blinked. She opened the message from HR. "Request acknowledged. Transfer approved. You will join the Office of Cultural Development as a case study and training developer. Terms include public accountability, salary reduction, permanent probation, and revocation of travel privileges. Confirm acceptance." Heather read it twice. There would be no courtroom battle, no exoneration, just exposure, and the chance to use her failure as a mirror for others. Her hands trembled as she typed, "Confirmed. I will own it." Back in the lounge, Chloe Ramirez entered quietly, invited by corporate after her live streams had drawn over 6 million views across platforms. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, stepping cautiously. Danielle waved her in. "You earned your seat." Chloe sat, eyes wide. "I've been covering travel stuff for fun, but this felt historic." Elijah turned to her. "You didn't just record it, you narrated the shift." Chloe looked down. "I've been followed in airports. I've seen my parents pulled aside. I knew something was off in the system, but I never thought one video could change anything." "It didn't," Elijah said gently. But truth, repeated enough, forces cracks. Ava Chen entered next, invited to join the formal witness circle. She held a printed letter in her hands. "I've decided to stay with Southwest," she said, voice shaking slightly. "But only if I can be part of the reform team. I don't want to work in fear anymore." Danielle accepted the letter with a nod. "Welcome to the future?" Elsewhere, across the country, other airlines were already reacting. American Airlines announced a $10 million diversity training initiative within 24 hours of the Carter revelation. United Airlines pledged to audit all bias-related complaints from the past 5 years. JetBlue launched a real-time reporting app for in-flight discrimination. The ripple effects were no longer theoretical. In the days that followed, Southwest rolled out its first batch of New Sky Protocol training modules, each beginning with a video featuring a single sentence. "My name is Heather Grant. I made assumptions, and they nearly destroyed me." She appeared on screen, composed, solemn, unguarded. "I believed discretion meant power. I believed I knew what a threat looked like. I was wrong." The modules were mandatory for all employees, and her story became a touchstone for cultural humility. Raw, unedited, unforgettable. In interviews, Elijah emphasized the philosophy behind the program. "We're not canceling people, we're canceling patterns." Danielle added, "Accountability isn't about punishment, it's about prevention." Ethan, now something of a national voice among young activists, launched a campaign called #ClearSkies, providing a platform for passengers across all industries to share real-time stories of bias, success, and silent injustice. His first post read, "One flight, one voice, one rule. Dignity is non-negotiable." The Carter Trust's $50 million investment became the cornerstone of an industry overhaul. Within months, Southwest reached 99% audit compliance, and customer satisfaction soared across all racial and cultural demographics. Heather, now working in a low-lit office with training designers, spent her days reviewing every incident she'd ever written off as justified. She began designing workshops, not as a hero, but as a warning. And slowly, her story found meaning. At the next board meeting, Janet Harrison stood before her peers and read the new mission statement. "We fly not just people, but principles. We are no longer just an airline. We are accountability in motion." The room stood in applause. Elijah remained seated, letting the echo of that statement settle. It wasn't about the flight anymore. It was about how high they were finally willing to rise. 6 months had passed. Not a single incident of reported discrimination had surfaced within Southwest Airlines since the implementation of the New Sky Protocol. Cabin audio was monitored not to control passengers, but to protect them. Bias alerts had transitioned from technology to culture. Employees no longer feared AI detection because they no longer needed to. The company hadn't just transformed its systems, it had redefined its soul. The Carter name had become more than a household story. It had become a model, a framework, a case study. Ethan Carter stood on a stage at Georgetown University, his voice clear, unwavering. "I didn't set out to become an activist," he told a packed audience of college students, educators, and federal regulators. "I just wanted my family to be treated like people. Turns out, that was more revolutionary than I thought." The room erupted in applause. At only 18, Ethan had already published a best-selling book titled Skyward: How a Quiet Flight Changed a Noisy Country. The memoir detailed not only the events of Flight 3298, but the quiet strength that had carried his family through it. The book soared to #1 on every major list, translated into 12 languages, and adopted by high school and university curricula nationwide. The final chapter ended with a single line: "We didn't raise our voices, we raised the standard." Ethan was now considered one of the most influential teenage voices in America, regularly invited to Capitol Hill, the UN, and Fortune 500 boardrooms, not as a token voice, but as a strategic thinker, activist, and author. His #Clear Skies initiative had expanded to include a mobile app that allowed passengers to anonymously report incidents across multiple industries, from airlines to hospitals to hospitality chains. The app's core philosophy? Data plus dignity equals change. Danielle Carter had been appointed as a senior advisor to the U.S. Department of Transportation, where she was tasked with creating the first federal guidelines for anti-discrimination training across all commercial travel. Her framework was being adopted internationally, with European and Canadian agencies reaching out to replicate the protocol. In Washington, she had earned the nickname the Passenger's Attorney General. When asked how she managed to remain so calm under fire, she always answered the same way. Because rage without direction is just noise. Law turns it into impact. Meanwhile, Elijah Carter stood at the helm of a new institution, the Carter Institute for Ethical Leadership, a center dedicated to training executives, managers, and government officials in systems-based reform. It offered a hybrid MBA certificate in ethics and crisis governance, co-designed with Harvard Business School and Stanford Law. The institute's tagline hung on the wall behind his office desk. Reputation is built in silence, so is collapse. His first cohort included board directors from Delta, Bank of America, Tesla, and the National Park Service. They didn't come for PR polish. They came for truth. Heather Grant's role had evolved too. Still part of the Office of Cultural Development, she now spent her days co-leading empathy labs, where she dissected in painful detail how her biases had gone unchallenged for years. Her recorded confession was used in over 600 companies' training programs. In one session, a flight attendant trainee asked her, "Why didn't you defend yourself more?" Heather replied softly, "Because the moment I stopped defending, I started learning." She no longer flew, but she made sure no one else would land where she had fallen. In classrooms across the U.S., a new unit was added to social studies and ethics curricula. It was titled The Carter Effect: Systems, Silence, and Strategic Resistance. The unit's core text was a curated blend of real-time transcripts, media coverage, and Ethan's own writings. Teachers reported record engagement from students, many of whom had never seen a modern civil rights story presented without violence or courtroom battles, just calm confrontation, strategic exposure, and real results. On the final page of the curriculum, a QR code linked to the original live stream, now archived in the Library of Congress under the section Modern Social Movements. One teacher in Michigan said, "It's the first time my students asked to extend a homework assignment. They wanted to understand more." At a televised interview with Anderson Cooper, Elijah was asked, "When did you know this wasn't just about a flight?" He paused, then smiled. "When my son published his book, and it wasn't about me." And in a parallel interview, Ethan was asked what he wanted people to take away from Skyward. He answered, "That silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's precision." He paused, then added, "And that real change doesn't scream. It sits down, opens a laptop, and writes a policy." That quote, etched in chrome, now stood at the entrance of Southwest's headquarters beneath the newly inaugurated Carter Legacy Hall, a space dedicated to the team that redefined what customer care truly meant. In the center of the hall stood a life-size digital display looping key moments from the flight. Danielle citing FAA law with composure, Elijah's quiet stare that collapsed false authority, Ethan's first live stream announcement, Chloe's whisper, "Something big is happening." And it had. Because the legacy wasn't in the lawsuit that never happened. It wasn't in the headlines or the awards or the funding. It was in the reform. It was in the fact that 6 months later, millions of passengers flew without fear. That cabin crew understood discretion was a responsibility, not a weapon. That frontline workers were trained not just to serve, but to see. And most of all, it was in the thousands of quiet, everyday moments where passengers sat, undisturbed, undescribed, undivided. At the final board session of the fiscal year, Janet Harrison closed the quarterly report with a single line. "The Carter family gave us a mirror. What we did next made it a window." Ethan smiled when he read the quote, then opened his laptop to write the first page of his next book.